Lock stick. Hi there, today we are talking about this knife, the Emerson A100. This is going to be a bit more of a long form review. I'll be comparing it to a couple of other knives which I feel are somewhat competitive with it, and I'll be doing steel testing, all that sort of good stuff. So again, on the longer side, but I think I'm doing enough to make it worthy of your attention. I hope so anyway. Enjoy the vid, I'll see you at the end. Alright, so this is the knife. I guess I'll start by going into some basic info about it if you're curious about the background of the thing. The A100 was kind of the line between Ernest Emerson making his original folding knives and then this larger tactical market that he then branched rapidly into. He's got a series of gentleman style knives like dress Emersons that still kind of get around the second-hand circuit, and then this is really where those designs sort of met the Emersons that we know now. So similar things you see recurring from this point onwards are the 154 cm steel, the G10 handles, the titanium, the thumb disc opener, the same pocket clip, and of course usually a variation of the chisel, whether being at just a chisel edge or a full chisel grind. So those are the things that sort of leapt off from this point here. Of course, the handles got a bit more, curved and ergonomic. The blades got, well, bigger and all sorts of, crazy tricks to them. But this is really like the origin point, and really it's where I probably fit in best with Emerson's designs. It's much more akin to a standard EDC knife or an everyday carry utility knife, and some of the more, I guess, either hard duty or combat focused ones that his line has sort of developed into. Alright, size comparison time. First up, I'll just put the basic specs of this bad boy on the screen. Right now you'll see it's I'd say mid to larger sized everyday carry knife compared to, say, if you're rolling around usually with a Spyderco Chaparral. It's definitely a few size classes up from that. So here's a Benchmade 940 next to the knife, so if you put them point to point, you see you get a little bit more of both really on the Emerson, a little bit more blade, a little bit more handle. Let's look at it next to my Spyderco Spidey Chef. A deceptively large knife, the Spidey Chef. It's a great EDC knife, but it is, on the mid to larger size itself. Looking at the Zero Tolerance 0470. Again, sort of a small offering from Zero Tolerance. You see there's about an inch less of overall space on the handle. Blades, about the same, frankly, so just a little bit more handle on the Emerson there. The Paramilitary 2, we all know the rough size of one of those. I think we've all handled a PM2 in our time. So you see there you get a little bit, well, a fair bit less cutting edge on the Paramilitary 2. The forward finger choil, I guess, is part blade. And even though the Para 2's got quite a large handle, even going handle to handle, you see the Emerson, it's about the same, if not a little bit larger. And then, while I've got a Para 3 here we can roll into. I'll point that to put those all three tips lined up there. You really see the bend in the Para 3, don't you, when you line it up next to a straighter knife. So that's those two there. That's another staple of the EDC world. The Ontario Rat No. 1 in D2 is a slightly larger knife than the Emerson. This perspective is betraying me just a little bit, but it's probably about a quarter to almost a half inch longer in total. Of course, the blade being just a little bit shorter in terms of cutting length, but it's got this kind of neck on it, the blade, so probably about even there. And then, yep, this is a Spyderco Chaparral I rolled out before. This is such a delicate knife when you compare it to the Emerson. I'll show you this here. So the Chaparral is a particularly thin and slicey knife. So you see that's the blade stock on the Chaparral, and that's the blade stock on the Emerson. It's probably about half as thick as the Emerson. So really great little slicer. About as opposite as you get really purpose-wise from the Emerson, apart from maybe you've had a gentleman's slip joint folder or a Swiss Army knife or something like that. And then rolling out what I think is probably my current stock, what I've got on hand, my closest competitor to this knife in terms of a few things is the Spyderco Shaman. Look, in terms of having like sort of thicker grinds, thicker blade stocks, quite rugged and robust designs, not particularly weight conscious like a lot of other EDC knives are. The clips are shallow enough carry, obviously, for quick grab and retrieval. The Shaman's about the same price as the Emerson A100 as well, and I'll probably talk a bit more about the direct comparisons later, but I think these both sort of compete for the same place in your collection, perhaps your harder working knife. The Emerson's very different in the way it's executed to the Shaman, but I think either of these would serve you quite well as your work site knife, or your drywall hacking knife, or you're punching a hole in the bottom of a steel bucket knife. Just that sort of stuff, those jobs that you end up randomly using your knife for if you haven't planned far enough ahead. So that's those two there. Kind of similar size, weight, general classes of blade there. And yeah, both for about $190 US. So talking about the elements, the G10 on the handles, on all the Emersons I've had or handled so far, it's generally uniform stuff. If roughness was a 0 being the smoothness of, say, this polished or this flat G10 on this Crewwear Spyderco Para, so then you've got, say, a bit more texture on this Spyderco Shaman, and then you've got, say, Cold Steel's Recon 1 stuff being like the 10. This would be somewhere around an 8 or a 7 or so. It's quite textured. You can do your fingernails on it, which I'm sure Mr. Emerson intended, but it's grippy stuff, that's for sure. It interacts well enough with the pocket clip, which seems to have a bit of I know it's probably just paint, but it does have sort of a Teflon-like effect, making it quite a slick pocket clip, which does work well when you've got such grippy G10 and no sort of relief on the G10 where the clip lands. So it actually does work fine with the clip as well. The 154cm blade has a dual-toned finish. This top part here with the branding, the Emerson, the A100, the USA, all that sort of stuff, that's a stonewash type finish, so a bit of a cloudy finish there. And then the blade grind, so the primary V grind downwards, that's like a machined or satin finish, so probably just a raw machine post belt finish or whatever you'd call it. And then of course this final edge bevel here, that's the chisel grind I was talking about before. This isn't completely flat like, say, my CQC7 that I had for a while. That just had this flat go straight across, like in a straight line running from there. This has a secondary V bevel going down on both sides, but then the actual apex, the shiny part that does the actual biting in, that's just on the one side. So that's a very token Emerson grind as well. You'll find most of his knives are ground this way. Some of them are ground full chisel, like an actual chisel, and then others do have the V apex as well. So, but that's what this one has here. The thumb disc is Emerson's preferred manual opening mechanism, so there is a wave feature as well. He puts on some other knives, but this one here, it's an effective. It operates just like a thumb stud, just like a thumb, launcher of any other kind. You just grab the edge of it with your thumb and give it a bit of a flick, and the knife comes out just fine. The disc, I suppose, sits quite proud of the surface at all points, really, so it's very easy to get a hold on there and get a flick on, so absolutely fine there. The knife runs on bronze phosphor washers, so the action is pretty smooth. This one didn't have the grittiness that some people complain about with their new Emersons. This one here actually had, pretty decent action out the box, not too dissimilar to how it's doing now. The pocket clip is, I can't see any images of a different pocket clip on any of the Emersons as they come from the factory. They do sell a deep carry style clip as well, but this one seems to be their tried and true. It leaves a fair bit of it out of the pocket, but it's only a small part of the, small part of a knife, really. It's not an odd shape, just pretty round, inconspicuous looking thing, really. But yeah, it's certainly not deep carry here. It's quite a shallow carry, really. But yeah, it's an effective enough clip. It goes over most kind of pants seams just fine. It's got enough ramp. Everything on that is good. So the clip, yeah, absolutely fine. The 154cm is a non-powdered stainless steel that Emersons have used for a long time. It's quite outmatched by a lot of the modern powdered steels, but those steels are just, great to excellent. This steel is good to great, which is absolutely fine. 154cm I found is nice level of rust resistance. I've been using this just washing it off under the sink, putting a little bit of EDCI on it afterwards. I haven't noticed anything even close to rust or tarnishing happening on it just yet, and I've used this in pretty sweaty environments. It sat under my work shirt, it sat in my work shirt chest pocket under some gear that I wear at work, so it's got a fair amount of sweat. I've actually taken it out, it's been sort of glazed over in my sweat a couple of times. Haven't really noticed anything like that causing it rust or anything at all, so absolutely fine, manageable, workable steel. With regards to how the steel performs and how the edge performs, I was very curious. 154cm is definitely the upper level of what non-powdered steels will do generally, depending on how hard or soft it is. I've heard this is somewhere around the 58 to 59 Rockwell, which is about what I would expect, and I was curious to see if a chisel grind helped or hindered it with edge retention. So naturally I took this knife into my shed, also known as the Knife Lab, and that is where the following clip originates. Alright, so for this portion of the review I'll be doing my edge test that I often do with knives. I'll be cutting this twisted sisal rope. Starting off with the factory edge, this is just the edge that it came with. Haven't cut anything with it at all apart from opening this rope. It's quite new into the knife's lifespan with me. So we're going to see how much twisted sisal it cuts on this edge, and then I'll probably resharpen it with something perhaps more of a mirror polish and see how that does. So thinking 154cm in the past with me has done with the 20-degree convex edge about 120-ish, I think. All the way up to about 180, maybe even a bit more with some buck 154. Leatherman's I think did about 150 or so, and that's rope cuts before the knife stops slicing a held sheet of paper like so. So yeah, it's an interesting kind of grind. We'll see if it makes much of a difference in terms of edge retention. Alright, so 136 cuts. This factory edge is now no longer slicing reliably through a sheet of held paper. It hangs up and sort of tears the paper from a point that's quite visible on the knife. It's got a slight little shiny spot on it that you can see where it's sort of finally given in and just flattened out again, or just dulled. So not a big surprise there. It's about what I'd expect 154cm to do. So it doesn't seem like having a chisel grind decreases the edge retention markedly, I would say. And yeah, so what I'll do now is I'll put on a probably like a nice mirror polish or something with the KME and see how that goes. So when it came to sharpening this knife, I actually found it to be a little bit of a learning curve. I thought, oh, I'll just do one side. But it's not like that at all. It makes a different kind of burr, which then, when you need to come back from the other side to knock off, it took me a few goes to work out how to do that efficiently without mucking up the chisel grind and using a stone and starting to force a V on it as well. I wanted to maintain it as a chisel grind, as kind of how they intended it to be used. So not a bad slide on the knife at all. It's just something to be aware of. You you're going to have to probably figure it out if you've not sharpened the chisel before. And with me, it ends up just being some counter strokes with a slightly taller angle, just to really aggressively knock it off on the KME, and then I put it on my Tormek wheel with some stropping compound, and that seemed to really get the most of it off. So then just a few light cuts against wood seemed to deburr it in a way that wasn't damaging to the edge behind the burr. So that's kind of how I did it. But yeah, there was definitely a learning curve to be sure. Up to 225 with my sort of much sharper, I think, more refined edge. The factory edge was absolutely fine, as I said, about what you'd expect, and then a boost of almost 100 more. So pretty good result on the 154 cm on the Emerson knives, in my opinion. So how does the knife actually go as a functional tool? How does it go taking it out of your pocket, making a cut, putting it back in your pocket? It's absolutely fine. I've had a really good time with it, and I'm really enjoying it. To be honest, it's not a difficult knife to like. It's very, very simple, and it really does whatever you point it towards pretty happily. There's going to be some things you're going to get used to. For example, cutting things like celery, you're going to be adjusting your cut ever so slightly to make sure your celery or your cucumber or whatever you want cut neatly is in neat portions and not sort of slightly veering off. Grabbing it and using it like any other knife, the very, very small details in the edge will alter your cuts if you're doing sort of finer work. But for your larger stuff, if you're just putting it in a cardboard box and slicing downwards, it's going to be absolutely fine. You're just going to cut cardboard just as you're used to cutting cardboard. I've cut some rope. I've had to had a really gory job where a kangaroo got stuck, and it actually tried to jump over a fence into a nursing home where I live, and it had broken its leg and hung there overnight and died, and it had sort of bled out. And so this kangaroo was so absolutely stuck on this fence, I had to actually cut its leg off to be able to get its body down. And this was like 5 o'clock in the morning, just so all the school kids who go to the Lutheran school next door wouldn't have this effigy to be traumatized by.
Oh, just get it out of here. Not into the kindergarten.
So yeah, to get it off, it was simply too heavy to lift it upwards, and it was frankly a bit of a mangled mess. So I just cut the leg off at the knee, and it just did absolutely fine. So hey, a bit of amateur butchery there as well. There you go. So yeah, it's been absolutely fine in the more conventional jobs and in the rather unconventional jobs too. No worries whatsoever. To grip and to use it, well, I used it in my rope cutting test and I was completely happy with it in that. It's just a simple handle. Simple handles, the worst you can say is that it's a little bit square and blocky. But that's not particularly a bad thing even. It's just probably providing a little bit more grip, a little bit more way for your hand to get stuck into the knife. Most knives I'm not using for more than a 5-minute period of cutting in a row. When I do something like my rope cutting, which is 10 to 15 to 20 to if you're talking maximum 30 minutes sometimes, that's when it really brings out the real intricacies of ergonomics. And even doing that, it was absolutely fine. It's a good handle. Not a great handle, but it's a good basic handle. I'd much prefer a good basic handle that fits anyone than a handle that may fit just the exact person perfectly, but everyone else has their fingers sitting on odd bits and bobs of it. So for sure, I'm absolutely fine with the handle, absolutely fine with the blade in use. A little bit of a learning curve using it to do fine slicing, but that's about all I could say. So in terms of my least favourite thing about this knife, it's got to be the lock stick. There's a fair amount of it, and it's been a lot. I've done a lot of working it and everything, and it doesn't seem to be getting much better just yet. I mean, whether it's a matter of taking months rather than weeks, who knows? But it's just, I can't not talk about it. It's definitely present. So the titanium lock, when you open the knife with any sort of degree of exuberance, so even something as simple as that, you're going to get some lock stick. Listen to that there. This can be avoided by opening the lock really slowly. Then you've only got a tiny bit, but yeah, it's definitely there. It's definitely something. So when you really snap it open, sometimes it can be a fair to get it back. It's not great. There's not really a great deal you can do about it apart from sending it back for maybe getting it carbonized, which from Australia is just too many weeks out. I had to sort of weigh up whether it was worth it or not, and it wasn't really for being without the knife for that long, because it's the one thing really that I'm not in love with. You can colour it in with black text, which is sort of a bit of a temporary fix as well. So that's the one thing I've got to say is kind of bumming me out about my A100. And to be honest, I've had Emersons before, and they all kind of had the same problem as well. So the chances of me just getting another one sent out and it coming again with this is not probable, but it's possible. So I think I'm just going to sit on this one because I'm largely happy with it. But there's definitely something to bring up: the titanium versus steel lock stick. So I guess a little point I'll cover on between these two, I suppose, if they're the same price and you're looking for a harder use knife, what's the better option? Well, I think frankly you're probably getting a slightly better buy in the Shaman, because they're both US made knives. They're both made by kind of the mid-sized cutlery company. Spyderco is probably a little bit larger than Emerson. You're looking at G10. You're looking at a decent blade steel. I think overall, in terms of execution, I think this is going to be a more crowd-pleasing knife. It doesn't do any of the weird stuff that Emerson knives do, but then people who are going to prefer this knife are going to prefer it a whole lot more than this one. Look, both of these will be completely adequate at slicing. Like, they're not going to be, as I said before, they're not going to be chaparrals or Spidey chefs in terms of how well they slice, but they're going to slice fine after a bit of, adjustment, especially this one. Once you adjust to canting your hand just slightly to accommodate that chisel grind, you can slice, no problems at all. But these are both just good cutting knives. And yeah, there is a difference between slicing and cutting in the way that I think of the words. Cutting is putting the knife in some cardboard and just tearing downwards. Your nice sharp edge will make it a slick cut, hopefully, but otherwise it's just getting those two things apart in as rapid, or as effective way as you can. Slicing is where you're going to perhaps be, taking some care to slice some, slice a ply of wood off to, make a feather stick, or I guess that's maybe even shaving. But the delicate stuff, yeah, you can do it, not as great with either knife. The slicing, you'll probably find, the cutting, you'll probably find maybe the Shaman slightly better. It's got the saber grind's perhaps just a little bit higher, so it still does have this sort of shoulder here to break the material apart, but it's got a bit of tallness to it as well, which is going to make it sort of slice and then separate. It's kind of the way I think of these things. They make sense to me. I'm not sure if it's coming across at all in discussion. Whereas the Emerson, a little bit of a lower grind, so it's kind of half and half, so half flat, half saber down to the apex there. Yeah, it's going to kind of wedge stuff apart a bit more, which is absolutely fine if your edge is sharp enough to get your cut started. So in terms of performance, look, it's going to be a close competition for sure, and it's just going to come down to your own personal preference. In terms of ergonomics, I think the Shaman is a more comfortable knife in hand. Wrapping your hand around the forward finger choil, putting just a fist around it, grabbing it in the sort of the hammer grip, just clench your fist. Less corners, the smoother G10 is nice. The traction is gained by obviously these kind of grooves and cutouts. The Emerson is absolutely fine in hand, as I said. It's just holding basically a squarish stick, which is totally fine. But yeah, it's just a good ergonomic knife, whereas I would say this one is a great ergonomic knife. So absolutely fine there too, no worries at all. It's just going to come down as a matter of taste. Some people really don't abide by choils and general swoopy handle styles. If you want something that's just simple and honest and rugged, then you're not going to have any issues with this one either. In terms of carriage, they're both about the same depth of carry, so I don't really have a great deal of comparison there. In terms of lock, well, the compression lock on the Shaman is probably a safer lock, as in you don't need to have your fingers anywhere near the path of the blade. It is probably a more fun lock to play with as well. The knife is on washers, but this one drops shut quite well. Overall, I probably would prefer the compression lock to just the standard liner lock, and especially given this liner lock still sticking just a little bit. I would love to have, I mean, a compression lock version of an Emerson would just be amazing. I'd love for Spyderco and Emerson to team up. But yeah, this, just a little bit annoying on the liner lock there. But apart from that, it's a very intuitive lock. Most people can work out a liner lock when you give them a knife pretty soon. Compression lock can take a bit more of a curve, you know, is what it is. The steels, I guess, are the one point of difference. So in my 17 degrees mirror polished sort of optimal edge for this knife, I cut 310 times through twisted sisal before it was no longer sharp. That makes about probably almost a 35% improvement on what this did with its kind of like. And you must remember, although that grind was 25 degrees, you got to remember it's 25 degrees and then basically 0 on this other side. So it's still accumulatively quite narrow. So yeah, and generally S30V is going to last a bit longer than any sort of 154 cm unless it's really spectacularly heat treated. So I guess the steel a slight leg up in terms of edge retention on the Shaman. Who knows, maybe toughness on the Emerson. I'm really not sure. I haven't really figured a way of doing reliable toughness testing as much as some other YouTubers have, that I'm happy to kind of continue and replicate and chart and whatnot. So yeah, slight steel edge, and therefore probably a slight edge in value to the Shaman, but I really do like these knives both a whole lot, and I really wouldn't knock anyone for choosing this one over this one. It's really going to come down to, like most things in the knife world, a matter of taste. So my overall feelings on the knife. Look, this is getting into intangible qualities, but I kind of admire the company and the brand and the guy a little bit. Is that really dumb? It's definitely a dumb reason to buy this knife over another knife if there isn't other aspects of the design you prefer. But to be honest, there isn't that many knives that look and operate exactly like this, but that definitely was something that keeps me coming back to Emerson. And even, you know, because I'm not a complete fit and finish monster, this has probably got stuff on it that you may well be screaming at the screen saying, but you haven't noticed that. But to me, it actually looks and seems fine, and I've actually carried it and used it, heck, for things that Ernie probably intends the knife to be used for, and it does really well. It isn't the finest slicer in the world, and that's fine. It's not pretending to be, but it is a very decent utility knife. It's just a real shame about the lock stick, because that's something that no amount of character, charm, or anything can really make pleasant. The fact that I've got worked hands, like my hands aren't like soft and gentle, and my thumbs aren't soft and gentle, but that gets a bit annoying from time to time. I may have a look at doing something with it, but then again, I don't really want to ruin my knife either. So until then, the black text is probably going to be the plan. But we'll see if it breaks in or not, I suppose. But that's really the only other thing. And look, you think they're old-fashioned in Emerson land? Check this out. Unintentional front flipper? Maybe. And that's just with my very, very primitive olive oil pivot lube. So there you go. Anyway, guys, I hope you've enjoyed. I hope you've got something out of this. I know it's an old knife, but yeah, I'm really just enjoying reviewing just the knives that I've been interested in, the knives I wanted to buy, rather than the cutting edge of things. So yeah, I hope that's alright with you, because it's definitely alright with me. Alright, I'll see you all in the next one, guys. Thanks so much. Goodbye.